Right, so yeah, Jono says I'm Steve, I'm a software manager at ITDev, and today I'll be just talking about how we use CI at ITDev. We've kind of used it over about the last 10 years, so a lot of lessons that we've learned, and I'm going to cover those kind of here on how we've accelerated the adoption of CI, how we've accelerated the deployment of CI and the maintenance of CI. So this is a brief overview of the tools that we use in our CI. So at the centre of it we use Jenkins. Now we probably decided to use this over a decade ago, probably when it was Hudson. And the main... Can everyone hear me?
Can you hear the back? Yeah? Okay.
Is that right?
It's good, right.
So yeah, as I was saying, we use Jenkins. One of the main kind of driving forces around that is that it's a free and open source tool. So when we first started, we didn't want to invest in any kind of paid for tools. And the way we use Jenkins is, I guess, in a traditional manner, we would connect it to some source control. And as a company, we would typically use Git or Subversion, depending on the project, favouring Git these days. And Jenkins would be doing our kind of integration testing on master or the main line or trunk or whatever you wish to call it, but also on branches. So if people were pushing changes up to the version control, it can also be checking their branches while they're developing. But what we also do is we use ReviewBoard, which is another free and open source tool for peer review. And we've actually integrated that into Jenkins as well. So a typical flow would be you check out your changes from your version control, you do any development. This could be on a branch, it could just be local. And then when you want that reviewed to go back to your version control repository, Jenkins will actually grab a copy of that as a patch. It will check it against the very latest master and it will run our normal automated testing. So it's kind of a pre-commit integration test. And at the same time, your peers are reviewing your code. So that's, I guess, the flow that we typically use at ITDev. Underneath Jenkins are just a few examples of tools that we run. And this does differ from project to project, but we've kind of built up some common tools that we use. I guess a few examples is we've got like Doxygen generation. We usually use that for our code documentation, but we also have publishing of that. And that means that Jenkins will actually render or allow you to view your documentation of your master branch. But not only that, it will allow you to view the documentation of any review requests. So you can actually review the rendered documentation at the same time that you're reviewing any code changes, which is nice. And then we've got things like test frameworks. So we use Google test frameworks, we use PyTest, persistent tests. We've got some static code analysis, just CPP check, VO++ style checker, usual kind of software things, Valgrind memory checker, Valgrind, I think it is normally pronounced, coverage checking, etc. And then down the bottom, we've just got a few examples of some FPGA stuff that we do. So we do use CI in kind of FPGA code, and when we've got VHDL changes, it still runs through our standard flow of going through ReviewBoard, going through Jenkins, and we've got static analysis on that. We run synthesis and we run simulations on that as well, all in Jenkins. And then what we tend to do with kind of results from all these different stages or tools is we collate them using Jenkins warnings plugin. And that allows us to have one kind of display of anything that might be generated. So that might be a failed test, It might be a synthesis warning, it might be a CPP check warning, but it's all categorized and prioritized, and it's kind of just gives you a nice view in Jenkins rather than having to trawl through multiple different plugins views. So, accelerating CI adoption. So we are a design services company, so we've got numerous projects running at any one point, and to resource these projects we tend to have some switching of developers between projects as different skills are required. So if we had a new CI environment for each new project, then it would typically, it might use different tools, it might diverge and might use different kind of job structures, etc. And that means a developer moving from project A to project B is going to take time to learn that new style. So what we've tried to do is, using the projects that were running CI, we kind of distilled the commonalities between them and produced a common configuration across kind of all these projects. And I guess that details the flow of things through kind of using our review board integration in Jenkins and what Jenkins is testing, so working on master branch, etc. And then this means that a developer switching between projects already knows kind of how the CI is working, and they can start using it and kind of debugging any issues that may arise from it. And any new projects that we create will start off from this point. So as we've worked on CI over the last 10 years, some of the environments kind of have evolved a lot and can be quite complicated. So it can be difficult for any new engineer, so that could be a new engineer to the company, a new engineer to the project, to understand what is going on in the CI. So just as any other, or just as your product, your code, you would document it. So we have created documentation of our common CI environment, and that covers kind of the workflows, so how we use all the review board and how CI integrates with the review board and version control, all the common jobs that we use, and all the stages in the jobs. Each one is documented with kind of responsibilities, the outputs, etc. And that means that, just as a new developer on a project would read code documentation to understand what's the purpose of a particular module, they would also just read our CI documentation to understand how that works, and that gets them started a lot quicker. And both of these helps them kind of adopt the CI on that project sooner. So deployment. As I said before, we've got multiple projects running at any one time, and the installation of kind of tools takes time. We previously worked on a single Jenkins instance and a single review board installation, and both of these provide you access control, and so you can have multiple repositories, you can have multiple folders and jobs in Jenkins, but managing client access to these proved difficult. So it is possible, but for us to guarantee that client A doesn't have visibility of client B's code was difficult, and so we wanted to run each of our projects in isolation, and that meant for each new project spinning up a new machine, a new installation of Jenkins, a new installation of review board, and everything connected together, which, like I say, takes time. So what we've done is we've got automated machine creation, and this is, I guess, a common thing these days. But it's we basically generate a new VM for any CI installation, and that would include the Jenkins installation and any dependencies and any tools that are needed for the particular CI, and we can have that up and running from pressing a button in a couple of hours.
Is there any reason to do that as a VM instead of a Docker?
We've always used VMs. We are interested in kind of investigating whether Docker would be a better solution for us, but at the moment we've not had kind of time to investigate that. And I guess as part of this workshop, I'm particularly interested in people using containers. So yeah, I think it's a nice route for us to go down, but we're not quite there yet. So getting the machine running up in a couple of hours is great, but what this was typically giving us is just the tools installed and the integration of review board to Jenkins. We didn't have any jobs yet. We did have the common kind of configuration and structure that we use, but then the jobs had to be created manually. So what we did is we actually created kind of disabled jobs in Jenkins. So we would go through the GUI and set up templates. They'd just be pointed at like a dummy repository, and they'd be doing all the various steps that we may need. So it would support all of the tools like static analysis and like building tools that we have used previously. And then when a project would get started, they'd go in, they'd configure the repository, remove things that they don't need, and just set up the things that they do need. So it's kind of all there ready for you. You just select what you want. And that meant that it kind of just sped up the templates, or sped up the job creation, I guess. And then from touching a button of I want a CI machine to having jobs running on your repository, they might not be connected to your build scripts yet, but if they're not there, if you don't have any build scripts, but doing that would just be maybe 3 hours. So it's nice and quick. And if you're starting a project from scratch and you don't have any code, getting the CI up running at this point is good, because it means that you would continue with using the CI throughout the lifetime of the project. So we always try and make sure from the very start that we're using it and it's ready to go. So maintenance. Because we started using Hudson or Jenkins maybe a decade ago, the normal way of configuring it would be to use what's called a freestyle project or a freestyle job, and that's kind of a GUI-based configuration. So you just create a new job, you would kind of configure your version control, and then you'd add kind of build modules depending on the plugins that you've got installed, and it's quite a slow process, and because we run multiple projects, individual projects are kind of evolve over time, and improvements come in on one project, and we want to share that across to other projects. Having to take one change in one GUI to 10 different other projects is slow and quite painful, to be honest. So yeah, we wanted to try and move away from this, and the answer to that is to migrate to pipeline jobs. Now, for those familiar with Jenkins, pipeline jobs came in about 3 years ago, I think, into like the main Jenkins. It's probably been available as a plugin for longer than that. But what you do with a pipeline job is essentially you define it as a script. So similar to, I think, GitLab, where you would use YAML or whatever, you would use Apache Groovy script to define your job, and that would define all your stages in your jobs, and essentially it's just code. So it's code for your CI pipeline, and it's then much easier to take like a one-line change from one project and patch it into all your other projects. The one issue that we had here is that not everything supports pipeline. So we're using particular plugins for Jenkins that were built on support for the old freestyle type projects. And that includes the review board integration plugin. So by just migrating to pipeline, that means that all broke, which was annoying, but I guess the beauty of using an open source CI tool is that the plugins are open source. So we just grabbed a copy of the code, and then we just added the support for pipeline. So we've kind of developed that and made sure that all the plugins that we use now support pipeline, and we're pushing that back to the open source community. So yeah, that means that we are now fully pipelined in all our jobs, and the rolling out changes is pretty much a breeze now, which is great.
Can I just ask, have you ever seen configuration as code
For Jenkins, yes.
I had a look into it a little while ago, and I couldn't really see that many people were using it. I wondered if pipelines might be the reason that if you're using that, you don't really need it.
As I understand it, configuration as code is more of the core Jenkins configuration. I can't remember what format it uses, but it's for configuring things like the Jenkins master authentication, and more global settings, I guess, and not kind of a per job setting. Now, we are potentially interested in this because it would help speed up our deployment. So rather than having to install Jenkins on a VM is easy, but then adding the plugins to Jenkins is more of a manual process. But I believe with configuration as code plugin, so you install that one first and then point it at your configuration, it can then go away and install all the other dependencies. We've not used it yet, but yeah, we'd be interested in trying it. So we've just migrated to pipeline jobs, but all of our pipeline scripts we've just stored in Jenkins. So what that gave us is we had a disconnect between our kind of production code and our CI configuration. So say you were to change a build artifact from your build scripts, and Jenkins was relying on taking that build artifact and then running some tests on it. Suddenly you've committed your change and your Jenkins is no longer working. So you have to, as a second step, go into Jenkins and reconfigure your job and update it to match your latest production code, which takes time, and you're playing catch up here, and it's kind of maintenance problem. So what we did, and what you can do with the pipeline plugin is have a Jenkins file in your version control repository, and I think typically Jenkins pipeline jobs looks for a file named Jenkins file in the source of your repository, but you can specify your own ones. And as a first step, it would do a lightweight checkout, grab that file, see what else it needs to do. If it needs to do a full checkout, it can do that, and then it will run all your stages. And this was simple, considering we were already using pipelines, so it was just taking the code, committing it to the repository, and updating the jobs. And what that means is you can then maintain your CI at the same time as your product code. So if you've changed a build artifact in your build scripts, then you change your CI to reflect that. And because we've got the review board integration, by submitting a new patch to review board, Jenkins will take that, it will update its configuration, and it will be testing your new CI pipeline before it's even gone live. And then it gives you confidence that that's going to work, that as soon as you commit and it pulls that from master, that's going to be working. And finally on maintenance, we found that for big products, your pipelines can get quite large. And I guess it's a common problem with any code. You start off with a small function, it's got a job, and it's a few lines long, and kind of it grows and grows, and suddenly it's 1,000 lines, and no one wants a 1,000-line function. Similarly, you could end up with a Jenkins file that's absolutely humongous, and to kind of merge any changes across projects or make any tweaks is difficult, and any reuse there is also difficult. So what we did is we kind of modularized our configurations. So each individual stage in our pipeline would become its own separate file. And then these are simply just imported into the top level job. And what you can do then is your different jobs can just import different level of stages. So let's say your review board job just does a simple check of just a few static analysis tools because you want feedback quickly. But your master job can import extra system testing modules or whatever else you have to do a more thorough check. But essentially they're reusing the same modules, they're just importing it at runtime. So that's those are the three things that have helped us kind of accelerate the maintenance of our CI across different projects.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Now that you script your jobs as pipeline scripts, don't you feel the need to unit test those scripts? I find that extremely hard to do. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment, and I guess we've had similar things before, like build scripts as shell scripts. Should you test your shell scripts? Like you can get linting tools for shell scripts, and that's something that we've used before. We don't actually test our pipeline scripts.
You hit the try button and then change the code and see if it works, as everybody does.
Yes, yeah. So I guess because we're committing on a branch first, or we're going through a review board, then Jenkins is already testing that it's syntactically correct, and if it doesn't work, it will fail a build, and it's doing that before you've committed to master. So master is generally protected, I guess.
I just think that there's a lot of tools to do.
Yes, yeah. I'm certainly not aware of anything. I'm sure there's things that you can run through Groovy to check it's kind of syntactically correct, but anything else I'm not really aware of. So basically bringing all these things together and the lessons learned and kind of the ways that we've accelerated different aspects of our CI at ITDev, we've kind of packaged up and called Accelerate CI. We use this internally for all of our new projects. So that could be internal projects or it could be new client projects. We would always use Accelerate CI to spin up a new VM. And what this gives us is we've got the automation of the VM creation. So just press a button and it goes away. I've said it's 3 hours, but that's not a developer's time or an IT person's time for 3 hours. It's kind of elapsed. We have an isolated CI environment per project, so it's now really easy to give client access to just that machine. So we would just set up a VPN connection to that machine only, and then we're guaranteed that they can't access anything else in our system. We've got our templated jobs and pipelines and modular stages. So that's quite flexible, and we've built up. So Accelerate CI includes all the stages that we currently use across all of our projects. So a new project might not use all of these. So you might not be doing kind of FPGA stuff at the same time as software, and you can just pick and choose as you require, but as it rolls out, it has everything, and then you just customize it. Now, we also have fully documented workflows for this, and we've got the documentation for the CI actually next to the CI, next to the product code, all in version control, and it's all rendered using Jenkins, and it's published on the VM, so it's all in one position. And if you were to modify your product code, and if you were to add a stage, and you were to document that stage, you can do that all in one commit, and it's just handled. And, well, like I say, yeah, everything is under version control. So we've been using this on client engagement projects, so where we've been doing design services, and they were very interested in our environment and actually wanted us to roll it out. So we've recently rolled this out to them and given them a duplicate CI environment, so now it's actually running as a VM in their system, pointing at their repository, running the same jobs, and they're pleased with that. And yeah, basically it's now available as a service. So it builds on what we've learned over the last 10 years, what we've developed internally, lessons learned, etc. And we can customize it for each client's needs. Any further questions?
How often do you revisit the modules that essentially you've written yourself to find out if somebody else has now done that in the open source world? Just because one of the things we did, as you guys sort of would have seen firsthand, is we spent ages developing loads of stuff on C2, so on our internal projects, and then when we got to the end of the project, found that the changes in pipeline, Kubernetes and a few other things, we found that if we changed our infrastructure to use the multi-branch plugin from Jenkins, and a Jenkins file, we threw away 15 man-years worth of bash scripting that had been developed on the previous project. So it's quite easy to end up with a CI system, this is really, really good, and then you iteratively go back and throw away stuff. This is the sort of story, you have an investment phase, and then you deliberately throw away stuff you've developed just because you don't want to maintain it yourself.
Yes.
How do you guys sort of go back?
I guess we would typically do it kind of on project creation. So whenever we reuse it, if people are happen to make tweaks to it, if we find that it's not sufficient for that project, which is sometimes the case, and there's something else out there or a better way of doing things, we try and always feed back that to kind of our Accelerate CI. So that's how Accelerate CI has come about, is that we're running on it on multiple different projects and they're all doing different things. So we try and take the best of everything and kind of bring it back to one. So there is still the problem that we do throw things away, but yeah, I'm not sure how you solve that.
Any other questions for Steve?
Would you ever move away from Jenkins now?
Potentially. There are things out there that do interest us. I guess some of the CI tools that we are aware of that are kind of simple or free, like I guess GitLab, ties us into Git. So for that reason we can't move away to something like that, because we need to support Subversion and Git. But if something came along and it was all singing and dancing and we had good reason to move away from Jenkins, then we would be open to it. I guess similarly, if it was a paid-for solution and we had confidence that it satisfies our needs and we didn't need to spend as much time modifying plugins, then potentially we would do that as well.
You mentioned that you have a template Jenkins file, and then you mentioned that you can use modules and call all the Jenkins files from the Jenkins file. Could you, and also that you want a common workflow, could you have a centralized version control Jenkins file which defines your workflow that then calls project-specific Jenkins files from it?
I guess you could. We've not done that typically in the past. So what we would do is we've got all of our kind of Accelerate CI development, in its own environment that's got all the Jenkins tools and Git version control, and we would typically take an export of that, of the latest version, and import it into the new project's repository, and then let them customize as needed, rather than kind of referring back or anything like that, or having separate repositories. Yeah. But we do, like I say, we always try and feed any changes back if they're beneficial.
The only risk is then obviously the duplication and then the kind of manual effort of feeding back lessons learned into the generic workflow into other projects.
Yeah, I guess because everything is in the version control and text base, it's up to date. It's been quite easy. It's generating patches and bringing them back in. So it's not been too much of a headache, I guess.
Okay.
That's it. I'll say thanks, Steve.
All right.
Thank you.